Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review of Reef. This is the next game from Next Move. These are the people who brought us Azul last year. And while it looks similar in that you're building patterns and using these nice chunky pieces to put on your player boards, it's certainly quite a bit different in many, many ways.
It's also from Emerson Matsuuchi, the designer of Century and the new one, Eastern Wonders. 2 to 4 players, as you mentioned.
Yep.
Very quick, 30 minutes in and out to play a game. So let's talk about the components. There's not a whole lot here. You have cards that are going to drive the gameplay, and you have each player is going to have a coral board, which is a 4x4 grid. They're going to be placing these coral pieces on them in specific patterns, and then you have victory point tokens. That's it. That's all the game has component-wise. So to start the game, each player is randomly dealt one of these coral boards. You're going to notice that one of them has a starfish in the corner. That's going to designate that player as the first player. Then each player is going to take one of the 4 different types of coral pieces and place them in the center of the board. Now, the number of coral pieces that you use is different depending upon the number of players. So we have a 4-player game set up. All the pieces are used. Now, in the center of the board, these can be in any arrangement that you so wish. But before you place them, you're going to be given 2 cards at random. On the base game, you can place these. Each player is placing these in the center.
Right.
However, in the advanced game, you can look at your cards first, see what you're trying to attempt to do with those beginning cards, and then move these in any locations that you want. One of the rules before we get into the actual gameplay is that these pieces, when you put new ones on the board, they can be placed anywhere, right? There's no rule to them other than they can't be 4 high. So you can have different colors on top of each other. You can have pieces all over the place. It doesn't matter. It's trying to build a pattern that really matters.
Yeah, this is one of the beauties of this game, because a lot of people see games like this and think, okay, what are all the rules for placement? And in all honesty, there's not many rules in this other than, like Jeremy said, you can't be higher than 4. Different colors on different colors, you go wherever you want. It all depends on what you're trying to do with these cards.
Let's talk about the anatomy of a card, and then we'll get into the gameplay. Each card is broken into 2 sections, or actually 3 sections, a top, a bottom, and then the number of points it could possibly score for you. The top is when you play this card from your hand, that's what you acquire and have to place onto your Reef. The bottom is what you could possibly score at that moment if you have that pattern somewhere on your board, possibly scoring it multiple times. What you score is in the bottom right-hand corner. So if you have this pattern multiple times, you just multiply by that score. So it's all about trying to get the right pieces and then place them on the board to score for very particular patterns.
So let's talk about the gameplay. Jeremy already mentioned how you're going to play these cards, and we'll get into that a little bit more detail. But the other thing you can do on your turn instead of that is to simply take a card into your hand. When you do that, you're going to take one of these 3 face-up cards or the top face-up card of the deck. If you take one of the 3 face-ups, you're simply going to take that into your hand and replace it with the card from the deck. If you want to, you can take the card that's already on the top of the deck. If you do that, though, you're going to have to take one of the points that you already have and place it on the lowest value card that is one of the 3 face-ups. If there are 2, for example, in this case, that are tied, it's up to you, the player, to decide which one you put that point on.
So that's one of the options, is taking a card. The other option is to actually play a card from your hand instead. Now, as we said, you can pick any one of the cards in your hand. You do have a hand limit of 4, so you are forced to play cards through the course of the game. You can't just acquire a bunch of cards. When you play a card, you're going to pick one of them from your hand, place it next to your board, and then acquire the number of coral pieces according to whatever it shows here. In this case, 2 green. Before I get to score the card, I have to place these greens. You never store anything on your side of the board. They always go to your Reef. When I do so, I can place them wherever I so wish, in any location that I so choose, just noting that they can't be higher than 4 when they have been placed at the end. Once I do that, I then look at the bottom of the card to see if I score that card. And now, each of these provide different types of scoring options. Some of them are simply patterns, have a square pattern of particular like, have a diagonal pattern, an L-shaped pattern, have a specific level that is so many high, some wilds, and so forth. This one says, look at my highest purple on my board, which is this one, and I score 2 victory points for every yellow that is around it. So I would score 2 victory points. I place this card face up next to my board, I collect 2 victory points, and then it's the next player's turn. And you're just going to go round and round, taking one of those 2 options until one of these coral stacks is 100% depleted, or if the stack of cards is depleted. Once that happens, you're going to finish out the round so that each player has the same number of turns.
Yeah, and then at the very end, everyone's allowed to not do the top part, but any card you have in your hand, you're able to try to fulfill the bottom if you can, based on your the status of your board at that time.
And then you're simply going to score up all your victory points. It is incredibly simple to play, but the spatial element in this game is very, very cool. Trying to fix these patterns and get them to fall in very specific ways is unique because of the fact that you're acquiring these cards. A lot of the times you acquire cards, but you hold on to them for several rounds to be able to get the most possible points out of them, because you can get multipliers on these. If you have some of the cards, like for instance, if you have 4 high of greens and you have several of them on the board, they're each worth 5 victory points. So you want to get as many of those built before you play that card.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing, the timing in this game, because you want to keep pushing and pushing to maximize those points, but at the same time, that same card might have a couple pieces on the top that you really need at a certain point. So there's some decisions that you make from time to time. This is also going to come into play with the cards that you choose out here, because if you're going for 1 or 2 more stacks of 4 green, for example, and there's no green to be had up here, you want to kind of bide your time and do some other things, while at the same time not disrupting the green stacks that you already have going on.
And the other cool thing about it is if you look at these cards and you really break them down, you're going to notice that the top part never matches the bottom part. So the type that you get up here never matches what you have down here. So you're always thinking in a very unique way. I'm going to place these 2, but I'm not going to score the ones I just placed. I'm scoring probably different colors and different patterns.
Yeah, the best I did in our plays is to like look maybe a turn 2 or 3 ahead and see, okay, I'll play this, which will set me up for that, and I got maybe 1 or 2 cards played, and then you have to kind of reassess things.
So, fortunately or unfortunately, what do you think about the game, and how does it compare to like Azul? Because that is what people I think are going to compare the game to.
It will be, and I'll get this right out of the way, people will compare it that just because it's the next game from Next Move. It is also part of that sort of line.
Abstract as well.
Their abstract line. The game is nothing like Azul, except from the superficial aspect that you have player boards
and tiles
and big chunky pieces that you're going to be placing on those, and it's obviously an abstract pattern building game. It's completely different, and I will say this, as everyone knows, or as a lot of people know, Azul is one of my favorite games from last year. This game surprised me. Like, I was somewhat skeptical beforehand. I don't know why I should have been, because Plan B and Next Move and Eggertspiel, I've been knocking it out of the park, and they did again with this, in my opinion. This is a lot better than I expected it to be. The thing moves at a lightning pace, and almost every turn is super satisfying because you're scoring some points literally almost every turn. Like, there's going to be... this is one of those games where you don't want that turn where you're like, oh, I really need to do this, but I'm not going to score any points. That's going to be super rare, but it's also kind of fun that you have to be stuck in that position.
I 100% agree with that. My only negative to even say about the game before I get into my positive is the fact that I think it probably, at least for me, this has some similarities to a game called Dragon Castle from CMON, where it plays better as a 2-player game for the fact that you can kind of choose your strategy ahead. You can start to build the cards in your hand at a much quicker pace. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's 4 cards always available. And they're in a 4-player game, the cards that I want to get in my hand to build those combos are probably going to be gone by the time it gets back around to me. So it's harder to plan some of those in advance in a 4-player game. Very similar to Dragon Castle. Now, having said that, it still plays super fast, so it doesn't really matter at that point.
I would agree with that. I would say one of the things I noticed while we were playing is you can get a fairly good sense for what your opponents might have in their hand, because you get very familiar with the cards that are available up here. It's not very frequent that you're going to be thinking, oh wait, what were the cards that were just there? You'll have remembered, because you're going to be studying those very closely. Plus, it's just 4 colors. So if you're looking for that green and it's not come up, and the green comes up and you take it, pretty soon you're going to realize whether someone else has some green in their hand, whether they're going for green based on what their board looks like. So you can sort of like decide where your strategy wants to go relative to where other people are taking theirs.
And I think that's why I like it as a 2-player game too, is because when we were playing as a 2-player game, I saw you looking at my board. I saw you taking very specific cards that would block me from being able to score specific routes, and I could do the same to you. But it's much harder to do in a 4-player game. You have less control over not only blocking players, but being able to feed your own engine in there.
Yeah, it's one of those games, even though you're controlling your own player board, these cards up here are going to be very different potentially by the time it comes around to you. Now, the good news is, if someone plays a card, or two or three people play a card, they're going to be exactly the same as they were when they were to you. So it's probably not going to be completely different, but it definitely has some changes that you have to adjust to.
I love that it's super fast. Like, despite that one pet peeve I have is playing better as a a two-player game, it's so fast that it doesn't really matter. You're still going to play with 4 players, probably under 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, this is a crazy fast game. This is the kind of game that I could see families having, like taking on vacation and just playing game after game and resetting it and playing up again.
Yep. Anything else?
No, I think it's a great game. This is another one of those games, like I said earlier, Next Move, Plan B, all of their brands seem to be knocking out of the park, and they did it with Reef as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Reef, that is from Next Move, 2 to 4 players, plays in 30 to 45 minutes. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.